Good evening, everybody. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon. My name is Amy Sanchez Arteaga, and I'm a lecturer of art history here at SDSU. I am facilitating the Amplify lecture series this semester for students. And I just wanted to start us off by welcoming everyone and also starting with an acknowledgement of the Kumeyaay people whose land our university is built upon, and also acknowledge that Sylvie Rosenthal, our guest speaker this evening, is seated upon the land of the Ho-Chunk people. We recognize the continued relationship between these communities and their territories, and we offer our thanks for their continued stewardship of these unceded lands. In the chat, I am going to just pop in. In the chat, I've just shared an article by Kendra Greendeer that our guest speaker has shared with us about the history of Techo, part of the ancestral home of the Ho-Chunk, for those of you who may be interested in taking a look at that. So welcome students, faculty, and community to our fifth lecture in the Amplify series this fall. The SDSU community thanks Michelle Schlecht for her generous continued support of Amplify. Thank you, Michelle, for supporting the series and allowing us to bring such awesome speakers to come speak to community and students. Amplify, Responding in Context, is a lecture series that centers the production of Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, LGBTQIA+ people, and people with disabilities in order to equip students and participating community with the necessary context and critical perspectives to participate and engage meaningfully with urgent polemics and debates in contemporary cultural production. I'd now like to welcome Professor Adam Manley, who will be introducing our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Amy. Hi, everybody. It's my great pleasure to present not only a dear friend, but also one of my personal favorite artists, Sylvie Rosenthal. Sylvie's an artist, sculptor, woodworker, designer, and educator, and so much more. She's truly a multifaceted artist. I think more than most people I know, kind of really spread out in a lot of different wonderful directions in her practice. Sylvie's been very prolific and sort of evolved a lot throughout her time and impressive career. And I've gotten to see a lot of that in my time knowing her, and you'll see that in her presentation. Sylvie received a bachelor's from Rochester Institute of Technology and a master's, an MFA from UW-Madison, University of Wisconsin Madison in sculpture. Sylvie's completed several prestigious residencies, including one at Australia National University, one here at SDSU, where Sylvie was the inaugural resident in our program. That I see Mike Ray is here. That's the same program that Mike is resident in right now. And one at UW-Madison before attending graduate school there, which is actually where we first met during Sylvie's time at UW. Sylvie's taught art and woodworking and material problem solving at institutions kind of across the spectrum of making, a really amazing breadth of institutions that I'll list some of them, but there are a lot. So that's including Haystack Mountain School of Crafts, Anderson Ranch Arts Center, Penland School of Crafts, Australia National University, UW Whitewater, Tainan National University in Taiwan, and many others, including a really interesting technical college in the Madison area. And a lot of really different practices taught at all of those. Sylvie has a very diverse body of work, and it's been exhibited in numerous locations, including the Fuller Craft Museum, the Mint Museum, Museum of Art and Design. And on top of all of that, Sylvie's a vital community member in the world of craft, art, woodworking, and beyond. Sylvie's advocacy in particular for LGBTQ involvement in the craft world has become an important element in her practice. And I think one really interesting, important part of her resume was sort of being a part of Haystack Mountain School of Crafts' first their inaugural, they have like an LGBTQ workshop series that they started, and Sylvie was one of the lecturers invited to participate in that. So I can't say enough about Sylvie as a person or as an artist, but it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Sylvie and Sylvie's work. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Amy, and thank you to everyone who's here and SDSU for having me. It's a really great opportunity. I haven't given an hour-long talk in a while. I have the luxury of not being Zoom-based this last little bit of time. So I'm going to jump into my slideshow and share a screen, and then we can, for the Q&A, we can go back to this. So we will go here and here and here. Okay, I did it. So as Adam said, I am Sylvie Rosenthal. I'm an artist, sculptor, woodworker, educator, and designer. I own and operate a small studio called Lower Astronomy Studios, which is something that I consider that I've been working towards and for. It's a LGBTQIA safe space studio. I employ queer folks who are traditionally marginalized in mainstream wood studios. And I am just starting an apprentice sort of program I just fielded from the Queer Madison Facebook group. I'm needing some new employees. One woman who's worked for me for years is about to have her second baby. And that's also something that isn't usually navigated within most mainstream wood shops. So I work to hire traditionally marginalized people, BIPOC folks, and especially queer folks. So I started making things when I was really little. This is a Calder-esque circus I made in 1989. A privilege of growing up at a design education museum, which taught hands-on tool making, rockets, fire, robots, catapults. And I did not have a parent who was very mechanically inclined, which most people think it was. My grandfather would take me into the basement to hammer nails. But by the time I was 8, I worked 3 days a week at the Children's Museum. And on the left is something like I would have made when I was 10. My mom got me a drill and a saw, and with no guidance except for what I learned at the museum, I used them. I just wonder what I held things with besides my digits because I didn't have any clamps. On the right, I made a series of large carved hands. The Children's Museum, we did a lot of really wonderful projects, and it's in New Haven, Connecticut, where I grew up. And they have the International Festival of Arts and Ideas, and they have a kinetic sculpture race. So these hands originally held these Lego figures, and it was a hybrid of Leonardo da Vinci and Legos. So it was Leonardo da Vinci. And we had kids dressed like Legos, and these hands holding Lego buildings and Leonardo's inventions that were made of Legos. And now they live on the ceiling of the museum. So as Adam said, I went to the Rochester Institute of Technology for woodworking and furniture design, which was a really wonderful experience in sort of tempering the belt sander kid that I was. It was a traditional sort of like Bauhaus European woodworking program. And here's a bench. And the prompt was to make a bench with no straight lines. And so this was my first like large form stack laminated carved piece, and above is sort of what it felt like when I was making it. And the upholstery pops out for occasional storage. And in woodworking, occasional means either it's not very functional or useful, or you just don't use it much. After I went to college, I moved down to the Penland area in Western North Carolina. I knew that I had a really wonderful education and I could dovetail the heck out of stuff, but I didn't think I was necessarily skilled in making a living. So with my mentor, Doug Sigler, I built 2 houses from the ground up, which provided a really amazing practical education. And we did everything from dig footers to making the cabinets. You did wonderful jobs and you did the worst jobs. And from Doug, I truly learned what it meant to have a mentor. I'd had other mentors, but we could have real conversations about it, that a mentor is someone who keeps you accountable to your own dreams. And when I started transitioning to have my own studio, Doug and I made an agreement that I would work 20 hours for him a week and 40 for myself. And so this is the last piece I made when I was working for Doug, and I got invited to be in my first museum show at the Fuller Craft Museum. And this is a piece titled Birdie Sweet. And I had about 3 months. And I was like, I'm going to make the most complicated thing I can. And so this piece is a dressing table. And I like to be, there's certain pieces of furniture that I love. Most furniture is communal. And a dressing table is owned, used by one person. So I wanted people to think about it as like a friend and a confidant. So you could like put your arms on the side of the table and be like, oh my goodness, let me tell you something. And lots of little drawers for little unmentionables. And so one thing I forgot to mention, when I went to welding school before I went to woodworking school. So my work can have sometimes has metal in it. And the bird on the side of the dressing table is a kinetic steel bird that when you turn the crank, it flaps its wings and nods its head in call and response. So you can say, do my earrings look good? Did I fuck up? And so you can spin your question to always get you always get the same answer. And I wanted it to be elegant, and it was definitely, you learn a lot about geometry making things. So when I first came to San Diego State for my first residency, Wendy Maruyama asked me to come out for an unfunded residency, and being asked to do something I know to. So you hustle. And this piece is a kinetic, again, one of the kinetic birds, and it's a decision-making device for the indecisive. As I said, my dad is not technically inclined. He's a word person. And when I went to college, he gave me a die, a plastic die with stickers on it. And it said, fucked, completely fucked, mildly fucked, sort of fucked. And I was like, thanks. He was like, just so you know how you're doing. And so that played into this. These have these steel cubes with yes, no, maybe, fucked, completely fucked, mildly fucked, disaster, debacle, all these words. So, and the dice have a nice hand feel and they make a noise. And then again, the call and response sort of reinforces the outcome. And I made my first one of these at San Diego State, and this is a later evolution. I've made a number of these pieces. So we'll fast forward a number of years, and I had a studio in Asheville. The piece on the left, I started in my studio where they have an amazing aquarium, and I fell in love with a grouper and decided I needed to make one. But I took it to Madison with me, and it became this animals and architecture piece. And I had sort of decided that I was going to put up my shop into storage and just go on a little walkabout and change the way I'd worked. I literally felt like I needed to like pull things apart and make them more airy. I felt a little constricted. And this giraffe, my previous work needed full technical drawings. It was very, very meticulous. And I'd gotten some feedback from a colleague that the precision in the work, in my intention was that it would make things less distracting, but it was so gem-like that it was distracting. And so I started to just loosen up somewhat and work more free form. And so this giraffe was the first piece I made. And as we all know, transitions are difficult. Moving to the Midwest in January sucks. And so I was thinking about what I wanted to do. What do you want to do when you can do anything, right? Like you have to decide. And so I decided that I really wanted to make a giraffe head, and I didn't need to back it up with any reasons, because I could. And I was thinking of this Mary Oliver poem called Wild Geese that's a favorite of a lot of people. And I literally had the printout of the poem in my pocket for a period of time because I needed it. And it said, one of the lines is, let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. And it's like, I love giraffes. I want to make one. So I did. And then it became this lighthouse. The piece on the right is another piece I made in Madison titled Warren. It's a rabbit. It looks deceptively small in this image. It's about 5 feet long. And so with each animals and architecture piece, I gave myself a new prompt. The rabbit is the first one that's not bilaterally symmetrical. I came to San Diego where I first met Adam when he was a grad student. And I had this ram with me. I'd made parts of it in Wisconsin. And this is the first animal that I changed the proportions of the animal. I stretched it out, and I'm still like deconstructing the architecture. And this one's called Journey to an Empty City. And I was curious about if it was possible to gesture towards possible articulation. If this ram was climbing something, how would the building respond? Are there more of them? Is there a herd? Is this a solo animal? And in this one, there's no floors, no doors. Everything is a little jumbled. This is the last piece I made in San Diego. It's an 11-foot long blue whale with a roof rack. So then, as Adam said, I decided I wanted to go to grad school. And for me, going to grad school I really wanted to consider what research meant to my own work. And these are 3 pieces from my MFA show. And they all have carving, curious parts. So on the left, we have scope, and it's a carved narwhal tusk. And the overarching theme of my frame, right? And is it possible to dip like below the crust of the visible and come back? And this was all prompted by the idea for the piece on the right, which has gone to 1514, the famous Albrecht Dürer print of a rhinoceros is sold as an image of a rhinoceros, but Dürer never saw the rhinoceros. It was an image of an account of a rhinoceros. So it's like, how do you explain the indescribable with the language that you have, and then what comes after that? So the actual animal was part of the gift economy, and it was given as the first Indian rhinoceros in continental Europe, and was given to the Pope for the Pope's menagerie, like you do. But it never made it there. Because it was a beast, it was chained to a boat, and the boat went down. The actual animal's name was Ganda. So as a nod to the animal, and the piece is like a not quite erected or not quite fallen monument. And I wanted the rhinoceros to sort of be in its last breath pose. And the ballast in the back are bags of Indian rice. So it's not the spice of life or the spices that drove a lot of the historical trade routes, but just sort of the stuff of life. The piece on the left is a narwhal tusk, and thinking about the dumbness of humans and how we approach things, that a narwhal tusk is really the largest sense organ on any mammal. It can sense temperature, barometric pressure, salinity. And so what would it mean to make a sensing scope? At this point, I was really curious about working with ingestible materials. I was working with simple Play-Dohs and things like that. I'm gonna keep moving. In my residency in Australia, this was the show that I had. I'm interested in the connections of materials and how material is content in and of itself. So I'm still working with salt, clay, specific materials, and wood have ties to mythology, celestial beings, and all sorts of things. And so it was very interesting going to the other side of the world and not knowing what any kind of wood was, right? And Australia and Wisconsin both have big phosphorus economies. I'm very interested in things in the molecular level, again, below the crust of the visible. Phosphorus was made in the stars and it's in us. It's also what allows our RNA to zip and unzip to replicate so that we can stay healthy, but it also gives us things like the phosphorus bomb. Phosphorus is in matches. So I'm really curious about some of the problematic connections between things, and not at all to settle them out. This is a kangaroo clock. Seeing a kangaroo for the first time was a pretty amazing experience. So this was made with some mulberry wood, and mulberry is tied to Venus, which is the light bearer, which also ties back to phosphorus. So sort of making intersecting flight patterns of meaning that build and fall away. So I have a sister who lives off the grid in South America. And when I go down there, it's a really great exercise in working without power and what can I do with limitations. So the kids were getting out and the cows were getting in. So I rebuilt this fence and thinking about design in terms of it being both beautiful and functional. These, the gate is strong because of triangulation, but it also builds a pattern. The kids can't get out, the cows can't get in, and it's made with tree parts that I cut down, nails, and inner tube tires. So this is my shop. When I go there, I bring a handsaw, a crank drill. Making holes is an amazing, amazing possibility. So I take things apart and I put them back together and I repair them. I do a lot of tool repair. This is one of my sister's 2 machetes and the handle had broken. So I fixed the handle. This is an amazingly powerful tool that you can do almost anything with. And some of these small moves make really big differences in people's lives. And I think that the idea of repair is also very important. So in dipping into research and also language, if you research, I'm a big fan of looking up words in the Oxford English Dictionary because it will point you to a time when a word appeared and why, what's going on. A lot of the words that I go back to are from the 13th and 14th, 1300s, 1400s, 1500s. And this brainstorming is for a show I had in 2018. Incredible, unbelievable, beyond believing, order, potential, and all of this. I will bring it home to queer theory eventually. I actually can't see my whole screen, but I do see. So thinking about hybridity and how things are a combination of things or unlikely combinations of things. I'm going to be a little all over the place here. I'd had a question about what's the hardest thing I made. I try to every year give myself a design challenge just to sort of test my chops and see if I can make something. This is my replica of my 6 all made out of solid maple. And even the mechanics of it, there are aluminum pins at pivot points, but this is all glue ups of solid maple. And it was a really lovely, really ridiculous thing to make. And I also like it because it is a ladder and it is absolutely not a ladder. And I was thinking of the invisible labor that goes into things, such as maintenance and large houses. The show that this was built for is a home in Milwaukee that's now their decorative arts museum. And I researched the history of the place. So it's, for me, doing this historical research is really important to the work. This is in a room at the Villa Terrace Art Museum. This is an installation called Still Life as Oasis. And I see it as a timeline and a story and a still life. So it's pulling from prompts from still lives and the place and what we know of things. One of my favorite lines from a children's book from the 50s is, your floor is so you don't fall in the hole your house is in, and thinking about the layers of things that build what we rely on. So this piece also changed very quickly. It's not very often that your work changes meaning, right? The gem on the right very much looks like a COVID particle. Its inspiration was a Sputnik gem. So a Sputnik gem is a decorative arts trope as an ode to Sputnik and the space race. And you can get earrings, you can get necklaces with these gems that make precious this grand adventure. And I also like that the definition of Sputnik is fellow traveler. And so the home that this installation was in was very forward thinking in their engineering and did things like they were the first place to fuse glass to steel, giving us water heaters and keg linings, and brewing equipment. They also, in the World War II economy, like many businesses, we were compelled by the US government to make bomb casings, and they made over 60% of the bomb casings in World War II. And even A.C. Gilbert, an American toy maker, was forced to make weapons. So I'm just trying to complicate things and have people consider and pull things apart. So the left side of this table is a traditional sawhorse and breadboard end, and the right side is a more contemporary spindle leg. And the materiality is also very important. The left side is made out of Wisconsin quarter sawn white oak, and the right side is recycled Stoughton semi-trailer bed. So it's about how things travel the world and how things travel around and what are stowaways, what's intentional. Like making these non-didactic keys. So this is some of my non-didactic writing for people to get some clues about what the work is without me explaining it or over-explaining it or telling. This was another piece I made for the show upon so the other thing that this company did was make tubes for steel. They also made the mechanical marvel for Ford. So interchangeable parts, mechanization, and new materiality. Scotch tape as a woodworker and as a contemporary human, I don't know how I would do anything without tape. I love tape. It's just, it's an important thing. And where did it come from? Tape is also made up of layers. It's 3 layers. We think of it as one thing. It's a medium, right? Paper or plastic, and a sticky side and a release side, right? So it's really wound together out of 3 layers. This is put in front of a Sam Gross cartoon, a New Yorker cartoon, probably one of my favorites, of a tape dispenser and 2 snails. And it reads, "I don't care if she's a tape dispenser, I love her." And also thinking about interspecies love and love that it may be deemed appropriate or inappropriate, which is my tangential gesture at queer love or interspecies love or love's potentials. So this is Snail Moped, Rubber Tree Histories and Possible Futures. So along with different industries come new materialities. If you have a car, the best, we found out that rubber is the most effective thing to make wheels. Rubber comes from South American trees. Quickly, trees were transplanted into Asia where they didn't do quite as well. But once rubber trees are tapped, they have about a lifespan of 10 years. They're very scarred. But they're still a viable biomass. So places like in modern days, like IKEA, buy up this wood, section it together, and build things like stools. A lot of things that you buy will look, it'll say it's like an oak, but it's not. It's rubber wood finished to be oak. And this is a stool that's an example of that I found on my street. I made this moped into a snail. Snails often signify invasion or change, and were also a theme of the show. So this piece is called Battle Cat, Impossible, Possible. This is half a moped and with Battle Cat legs. So the Battle Cat is He-Man's mount. The Battle Cat is a cartoon animal that has already gone through a transition. So the work is also about transitioning and transitions. So the Battle Cat went from a very, very, very frightened animal to a very, very, very brave animal. So this is, I was, thinking about industries and hybridity and possibility. And a lot of this work has to do with the collapse of Linnaean taxonomy. This piece is Bear Cabinet, A Natural History. So this is a stuffed bear that I cut apart and made it into a cabinet. It's riffing off of a number of things. So it's made of mahogany, and it is, in considering the 40s and when this house was built, it was like the booming age of the Natural History Museum and sort of the display of man's taming of nature. And again, like, I love bears. Do I want to see a bear up close? Yes, yes, no, no, yes, no, yes, no. But I'm told I should be afraid of them because they're very, very deadly, but I still have never met one, right? Like, how do you know what you know? We know it through a screen or through some sort of mediation. It's not necessarily first-hand knowledge anymore. A lot of in the age of the Natural History Museum, a lot of these displays were built out of mahogany. So mahogany played a really important part in triangular trade. And so as slaves were being brought to the Caribbean for plantations and sugaring, true mahogany comes from the Caribbean. So as land was being cleared, logs were shipped up to New England and also to Europe, but the clearing of the plantations fueled New England's wood shops to make very, very high-end furniture. True small leaf mahogany has not been commercially viable since the 1800s. And so by the 40s, these were still sort of like the dregs of the trees, or what was being imported in that time may or may not have been legal. I don't know, but it was still, mahogany was in rage from, the 1600s on, and it decimated the land and then made way for sugar plantations. And so this cabinet isn't necessarily meant to hold anything. It's holding an orchid. In here, it doesn't have a back, and it just sort of leaves space. And I gave the bear paws and claws, and it is mobile. It is on this prop. So the show is called House of Risk. Risk is a thing I think about a lot. And we installed a large format teeter-totter without telling the curators. And so, the day after, we got an email that said it couldn't, we had to rope off the room, but that was part of the conversation. Within the show, everything was padded, everything was protected, but what is risk, right? And how do we talk about it? And how do we mitigate it? And how do we deal with it? This is a VCR study. I'm also obsessed with the Hulk, who is also someone who goes through a transformation. This is a Hulk cookie jar, which I think is an incredibly bizarre object because Hulk does not demonstrate cookie-worthy behavior, and his head is tiny in this. So in my childhood, the VCR was the first way for me to own an image and be able to pause, play, rewind, record, capture. So I made these mostly from memory during a residency and just trying to remember all the different configurations and what they stood for. So this is a little video. We'll start it right there. I wanted to show y'all how I make some of the larger work. So this is after a full design review with a client. I start with both scale drawings and full scale drawings and model making. The models really tell you about your dimensions and how the piece is going to appear in physical space. This was a wall mounted sculpture, so I needed to know how it interacted with the wall, where it attached to the wall, what my shadow gain was going to be. So this is putting together, I've already laminated up all of the basswood. This is solid. It was about 110 pounds. And so I laminate it so that the piece will be really strong. I start with the mounting bracket, so I have a level line before I carve something. And so I start with a chainsaw to get rid of a lot of material quickly. It's not the most fun. I love a chainsaw, but it's not the most fun work environment. So I quickly move to a grinder and then to hand tools. I do a lot of this slowly with hand tools because it's a much more pleasant environment and you can read the shape. Mistakes come a lot faster with power tools. So I'm a big proponent of hand tools. I still do a lot of things with my hand tools. So I use a lot of center lines just to give myself references, and you have to like clear your visual palette occasionally and decide what imperfections you're willing to put up with, what makes your theme song skip. So slowly, the piece starts to take shape. And then I rasp off the chip carving lines, and then I'll chip carve more, and then I'll rasp off the lines. And here I am adding a fin. And so the detail carving comes later. And these pieces always have this like weird adolescent phase where you're like, is it going to come out the way I want it to? But you have to know that you can repair things if it doesn't. This piece had a number of voids in it. I cut them out after the full shape. So here I am hand sawing. I would never do that with a power saw. And then I'm leveling these spots for the building. So here it is in my model. And I also needed the model because the buildings are built separately and they need to all be able to interact with each other. So here are some steps. And then the first step of my finish process. And this thing at some point becomes very precious where I can't move it by myself. As you see, there is a whale handle installed because it is a round, slippery surface and you don't want to drop it. And it really changes when it paints it. I really was wanting a translucent black finish on it, but my client preferred a solid black, and it had less problem solving in it because it's a black I've used for a long time. So here I am inlaying anchors. Again, lots of lines. You want to give yourself references. So on a piece like this, I am creating references that will be used for level and true. So I built a wall in my studio to build the rest of the architecture. And here I am. And this is informed by my home building, and also just I let myself be a little bit free. I'm still pretty finicky, but most of this will be clad, though the windows you can see all the way through, and I don't want distractions behind the windows. So here I am this was a halfway through photo shoot I was grateful that American Craft magazine asked me to be in. They were like, is the whale going to be finished? And I was like, I'm not rushing it for you. Here's all the siding cut, and here I'm starting to install the siding. So it's just like you would build a regular house. Windows go in, and then you put the siding in. And I have a number of pieces that I use to make sure my gaps are right. I use calipers and visual math to figure out the width of the slats so that they all stay consistent. And here's a little bit of, those are my little pieces that I keep so all the gaps are consistent within it. And I use a 23 gauge pin nailer, 23 gauge headless pin nailer to attach the parts. And then these videos were fun to make. So lots of cleaning. I can't to be mindful of my glue cleanup because I don't want to have to go back and sand very much. This lower building hadn't been fully resolved yet. And I was like, we'll just wait till the others are done. And so that's what I did. And so that bottom piece pulls out and that's where you anchor it. I make my own plywood for small parts so that they're really strong. And this is a little pool ladder. Bloop. And so that centerpiece pulls in and out, and that's how the rest of the houses are attached. And then that one slips in and is held in by magnets and gravity. So there's that void. And then getting to the little flourishes, it has an antenna. And these are my drawings. These are the drawings I go off of because I let myself be loose where it's more fun. This is a little billboard with water on it. You can see my highly technical drawings. And then it gets a water tower. And so the water tower is made by coopering. It's not a solid piece. I like the idea that it could be a secret stash spot. So it's fun to I felt like I hadn't made an animals and architecture piece in a while. It was really fun to flex these skills again. And again, I do math visually. People are like, you must be really good at math. I'm good at drawing and pulling drawings and trial and error. And so this has a little bit of handmade plywood in it. And then my work tends to have a lot of angles. And you just have to remember that 180 degrees is a flat line. And what are you basing things off? So there's the finished piece. And I'm going to stop that now and go on to the next slide. Oop. So as Adam said, I do a lot of different things to pay the bills. I have a production line of common and uncommon home goods. This also allows me to have apprentices in my studio. And so we make a lot of mirrors that we vend online with an outfit called The Artful Home, which sells all North American handmade goods. I am going to be launching my own e-commerce site, but it's a lot of work to build a website from the ground up. These are some other mirrors. I have researched and figured out how to marbleize three-dimensional objects. I like that it's a shallow depth. And again, you're dealing with elemental materials that have weight. And it's like, I'm a woodworker and I'm getting into the physics of turbulence, right? Like the shape dip tank you have will change the look. And I want it to look more geologic than bookend. But I really it's really a challenge and wonderful to problem solve these things when I really like getting into sort of these base elements. And so these both marbleizing and natural wood. I use all light, fast paints. And it's a highly time-consuming finish process. These are some other painted and carved mirrors. So we make a lot of mirror frames and we're branching out to vases, other home goods. So it's important to me that I have objects for lots of different price points within what I can offer. So we set up, all this photography is done in my studio. I have a little photo space in the studio, setting up props with other things. This bench is one I made for this prop, and it is made from reclaimed trailer bed material. These are some miniature stools. they're objects that I just like. I was using them. So when I made the first whale piece in San Diego, I made a ton of mini furniture for the roof rack, but then it ended up not needing it. But then I just really liked the little furniture, and I would make things like this teapot. Someone asked a question about my snake teapot. There are a lot of teapot collectors out in the world, and I got asked to be in a teapot show, and I was like, not sure I want to make a functional teapot as a woodworker, but it sure would be funny if a snake ate a teapot. And it's also a nod to the Little Prince, which is why all my snakes and teapots are titled in French. So this is a short stacked teapot. So I learn a lot from these left field prompts. I'm a sucker for an interesting prompt. You learn a lot by doing something new that you would never do. And all the different parts of my studio impact the other things. I started marbleizing things for the House of Risk show, and because I was interested in it and how it had to deal with time. I was interested in time and pressure and layers of things, and marbleizing seemed like, and it's also a decorative arts trope, right? It has a lot of different connections. So this was another technical exercise, a redesign of a Bauhaus lamp. Bauhaus was sort of made with new materials, which metal and sort of more ready-made parts, so it was never meant to be made out of wood, but to redesign it out of wood with its mechanics and to figure out how much slack you would need with a live material such as wood. And this will be bracketed under our home goods. So I do special projects, AKA commission work. Mostly my commission work, I make furniture on commission and a lot of different things. This is a table. This is the top of a table I made for UW Madison for honoring its 150th year of enrolling women. And so there's a lot of other things that I've talked about in here. There's celestial. We have the constellation Cassiopeia, which also makes the W, which is as big of a nod as I was willing to put for a red W. Cassiopeia is a complicated story about shaming women. And they're the stars that are around Cassiopeia, and then native plants to Wisconsin. This is native quarter sawn white oak. So the native plants, the Three Sisters crops as a nod to the indigenous folks. And I didn't want to, they were really on having an image of a woman, and that was very complicated for me because I wanted everybody to be included, right? Everyone, people of all colors, able, disabled. And I wanted this to be very separate from women's power of birthing and mothering, which is a very important thing, but we're talking about their place in education. One of the fun things about woodworking is occasionally you'll find bullets and lead shot in your material. So I cut through some lead shot on this piece and I embedded it with the stars because you can see how trees repair wounds. So it's about wounding and repair as well. I also do things like this. I helped a woman remodel her master bathroom. I teach at our awesome community college program in construction and remodeling. I teach the shop-based how to use tools section of it. And this woman had taken one of my classes and got a crazy contractors and was like, this was during COVID. And she was like, will you help me learn? And I was like, yes. So again, being a sucker for an interesting prompt, I'm really interested in empowering people to make things. And she was so happy, and her daughter got to see her making it. On the left is a sloyd, which is Scandinavian, quote unquote, peasant craft. So this is a sloyd rig for Parkinson's patients to use craft as activity and manual dexterity, as opposed to just going to a gym, having different things to do. And on the right is a series of hemp threshing tools that I made they're really flax threshing tools, and someone's going to use them for hemp. So we run all sorts of projects through the studio, and this helps me. I truly believe that studios have an impact in your community. I pay rent, I employ people, and pay a living wage. And it's a good, healthy environment to work and learn. And that makes impacts in people's lives. I collaborate with our local library system and make projects and teach people to facilitate these projects. Most of them have to do with kids keeping their manual dexterity. They're things that are open-ended and there are no wrong answers. So it's very different than school. So this is a marble maze, which has a lot of similarities to books. They have beginnings, middles, and ends. You can write them about whatever you want. So this is, I make large, go to the library, they'll let me bring my teach a pod of kids in my studio last year during COVID, which was great. They were already a pod. So they came in and just teaching kids to be curious. So this, I made a kid-safe sander. And we made a lot of pointy sticks because who doesn't like a pointy stick? And they learned how to chop wood. You got it. And these things aren't easy. It's frustrating to learn how to do some of these things. And they were really good sports about it. I also have a friend, made a local arborist friend, and we went on tree walks and learned all about different parts of trees and trees in different parts of the season. Birdie on the left is holding a chestnut pod. And so we're just exploring. And this is my youngest, who was 4. And this is just, you know, this stuff it's powerful to learn how to use a tool. Nice work. 2 more. Okay, go. Push it a little harder. Okay. Yeah, they don't call you muscles for nothing. Okay, go. Nice work. I mean, and I just wish I was still that happy every time I used a drill. And so that was a drill for a rubber band powered car. And so I did college level work with these kids. We designed chairs. And I leveraged all of their skills. Maisie's real good at putting things together with screws, drilling holes. So we made round tenon legs, and she wanted a spinny chair for her desk that was a cat. So Maisie most of the time came to class as a cat. So another thing I did, small business, you have to learn how to pivot. During COVID, a lot of the mirror sales tanked, and as like a lot of other people, I started making project kits. We did about 12 kits in 4 months, and here are a couple of them. And they're very different than what's commercially available in other places. These are all there are no robots involved. So, and I buy all my other wooden parts from places that are made in the USA. So I try to keep my supply chain legit. So all of these projects have little side tactics, such as folding and cutting paper, sanding, using, cutting an elephant ear from an Indian elephant, an African elephant, or from your imagination, right? That those are all things. These are desk buddies. This was one of the first projects, and skateboards, because no one should sit at a desk all day. LED nightlight, so simple circuits, and learning how to play with light and prisms. Pinball. And as Adam said, I teach at a number of non-collegiate craft schools, which is pretty fun. I just taught at Penland this summer and it was awesome. And I'll be teaching at Haystack in 2022. So as Adam said, I had the honor of being one of the instructors at Haystack's inaugural Out Maine event. And it was where there were LGBTQ high school kids from all over the state came to Haystack, and there were all LGBTQIA instructors. And I secretly fundraised and brought my friend's band out there because I was like, what's better than like an affirming queer band? And there were some instructors that were like, I've never cried at a punk rock show before, because the whole thing was so cute. And it was really lovely. So we did a large scale charm necklace for our hopes for the future and things that, you know, we felt powerful for. And then we were given as an object to Out Maine. So I also had the honor of serving on the board of the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, which is an amazing organization. Please check them out if you are worried or concerned about the pragmatic things about running a studio. They have they are a hub of information about like getting insurance. If your studio is legit, you know, do you have, you know, is your lease real? Do you like really basic safety stuff that's really important? And they give grants to artists in craft disciplines who have had who have had like major disasters and emergencies, life-threatening emergencies. So like with all the storms and the fires and everything that's been going on, it's pretty crazy. We did a lot of work in Puerto Rico that was really amazing. So that's that. Thank you for having me. I tried to go quickly so we could address questions. Below is my Instagram and my website, and soon my new website. But let me know if you have questions, comments, and or concerns about anything. I know that I didn't get to address a lot of the questions, so you can shoot them to me right now, I guess.
Thank you so much, Sylvie, for that wonderful presentation and that really like holistic overview of the many, many things that you do. Thank you so
Well,
much.
it's what it takes to keep a small business going.
Yeah,
I do all of it.
I think that's a really, I think that in some ways actually addresses one of the really common questions which a lot of students wrote to you, which was just about that experience of being a small business owner and of having your own shop. And so I think that, yeah, I think that question was really well addressed. Before I go to our long list of questions, I'd like to invite the students and the community who are with us to maybe ask questions. I don't know if anybody wants to ask the question of Sylvie. Here, I can allow folks to unmute themselves. So if anybody would like to ask a question of Sylvie directly, maybe we can start that way so that it's not me and like my voice again. So anybody, you can raise your digital hand or you can pop it into the chat. Otherwise, I'm happy to go to our question list.
One of the things I would recommend for people is to work for somebody else. It's a really great, even if it's for a month, for a summer, ask as many questions, see how they do it, because everybody does stuff differently. And the beautiful thing is there's no right answer. There's no one way to do it. And I think that that's the thing that terrifies people is there is no well-trodden path. You can do it whatever way you want to. Like for me, education and working towards diversity within the field is really important to me, right? Like we have for so long highlighted like European ways of doing things. And there's a lot of different kinds of knowledge and histories of making that are not included, you know, and I'm trying to inform myself because that's how I am directly brought up in that field, and how do we work towards accepting different kinds of making as, you know, they are delegitimized, which is not appropriate or okay in this day and age.
Yeah, I think that's and maybe to jump to one of the questions that arose. So there was a few students who were not just curious about how you make decisions about how the studio is run, but also questions around how materiality, so like how you choose material. So there was questions just in general about what kinds of materials you prefer, but also I thought interesting questions around reuse, and also the inclusion of kind of ready-made objects in your practice. So I wonder if you could address, Sylvie, that whole like bundle of kind of material issues.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I use only domestic material. I don't use exotics. Mahogany is a little bit of a, depending on where it comes from. I try to source material that is US grown and made, and that's that started being so intrigued by Sloyd is that all of that material is pre-commerce chain, right? We are so used to everything being within a commerce chain, and Sloyd asks you to go out into your environment and identify things and to be self-reliant. And I think that that's really important. And I think repair and reuse are also very important. My ready-mades are, I don't know, I think Adam and I had the luxury of going to Cambodia for a World Wood Day event, and there were so many mopeds. Like, I live in a college town, but like how they all look, I was like, oh, it looks like a snail. You know, like I just saw it and wanted to make that. It was incredibly difficult to find a half-working moped because I didn't want to buy a perfectly good moped and take it apart. But I think you just like seeing potential in objects, right? And then just if you can work with it, replicate, right? Sometimes it's the material that gives you the idea, and you need to remake it, or is it the actual thing? Because actual things do hold a lot of meaning, right? Like in the House of Risk show, I bought an original halftone print of one of the bombs that was made, and it was important to me that it was from that. Like, what's the intention behind it, and what is the weight that it actually carries, right? Do you need the actual thing to hold it? Like with the VCRs, I didn't want them to be busted old VCRs. That wasn't the point of making them, wasn't to find VCRs. Like, I wanted to replicate them. And it's always a balance of like gut and intellect, right? I would say for people to like, you know, if you have a hard gut feeling, go with it, you know, I mean, but you will, in academia, you do need to find the words to back it up. But I also have a thing for like little plastic animals. Maybe Adam has a better idea of my ready-made stuff. I'm blanking on like what is a ready-made. I mean, I know what it is, but like what's a ready-made in some of my, like the bear. Okay, so the bear does have a huge history. That's specific. Okay, I live in Wisconsin. I've always loved bears. I live in Wisconsin, and I really want a bear costume so I can shovel my driveway and sit on my couch because I think that's funny. So my friend Vanessa drove a bear up from Florida, and that bear lived as part of my household for a really long time. And it had a lot of own adventures by itself. And then I was like, you're not going to become a costume. You're going to become a piece. Because I was like, you need to be a cabinet for, like, in my research of the Natural History Museum, I didn't want to find a killed taxidermied actual bear, right? It was better if it was this like game of telephone of a bear, because the actual bear stand, like those bears are meant to be sitting down. That bear has the biggest ass you've ever seen, right? Like, it's a shelf. These are all things, they're all information that's like displayed in this game of telephone. And it's talking about like how material moves around. Like, was this bear made in the USA? No, I don't think so. This bear came over on a container. It is very much part, right? Like it plays this role within the backstory. And for me, it's not so important to me that I like didactically explain that to every viewer, but it's important to me that it's available if they want to put it together. I don't have a problem with being slightly enigmatic, like in terms of like my studio doesn't fit anywhere easily. Like I don't fit anywhere easily. So you make the space that you need to make, that you do fit in, right? And I think for those ready-mades, it turned it up even more. That it's like, it's ridiculous, but it's dead serious, you know? And some of that humor is like an entry point into a lot of things that you let people like let their guard down a little bit, but you're like, actually, this is really serious what I'm talking about. Like this has serious implications and attachments, and like, there's a million of these bears out there, right? Like there's a million of these things.
Yeah, thank you so much for addressing that question really fully. I think the other question that one of our students posed that I wanted to come back to, because I think you started to make reference to it in the talk, but maybe we can use a little bit of this time to flesh it out further, was just the way that queer theory shows up in your work. I think Emily asked this. And I think one of the ways that I made that relationship in looking at the work, but I didn't want to sort of like impose that upon the work, was thinking about this notion that were offered by Halberstam about queer time, right? And so I think in your materials, there are so many temporalities at play, sometimes all at once and overlapping. So I think that offer that you make us, that opportunity that you give us to think about non-capitalist modes of time and a different relationship, I guess, to also what like the like milestones, right, that heteronormatively we're supposed to experience in life might be. So I wonder, Sylvie, if you could maybe address that question a little bit.
Yeah, I think that it's even more like the refusal of it, also like the negation of it, the refusal of it. And I think that Halberstam is a great point. I've also been finding a lot. I've been rereading Cruising Utopia by Munoz, and that is right, like thinking about futures and positive futures, that like we are never there yet, but also how many and again, I think this speaks to like the layers, that there's so many things that exist at once, and the refusal to just take one track in it, and even things playing out linearly. Like for so long, I was like, I do everything in the wrong order, you know, but it's like that, oh, I'm just going the way that I want to, and that my work never fit in like the traditional woodworking. It doesn't really fit that well in sculpture, but and I think that there's a thing in queerness about not fitting, and that you are always in pursuit of better futures, and that there's like a fight for the future. In the work, I think it like sorry, I'm not the most eloquent. In like with the tape piece about like interspecies love, about like those hard borders that people put around love and combinations. And I think that a lot of the ideas of hybridity play with that like you can be a both and, right? And that you can love and more than just like a lot of I've done a bunch of reading on like biophilia, where it's like you can love, like that love is so expansive in queer thinking, that it's not just limited to people, and it's like in this multiplicity. And I think it's Elizabeth Groats who writes on biophilia. But yeah, I think that there's a really great essay by Julia Bryan Wilson about genders. And I think that like thinking about like, I think about my craft and like how I propose it, even like to little kids, has a lot of queer thinking in it, that I'm like, this is literal world making, right? Like we are making our world because the one preset and given to us doesn't fit and doesn't work. Like, what do we do with it? And we don't have to accept it. That there's like, and I think queerness deals a lot with like potential. And again, that's a thing that's future thinking, because it's never the actual, right? There's always potential. If anybody else has any thoughts on it, I would love to hear.
Yeah, I think that's a really...
Let me see if I wrote anything in my notes.
I think that's a really beautiful, like this question of potential and thinking through and about the future, I think is incredibly poetic, and also like a really hopeful reminder for us in this time. And I think that perspective is just incredibly valuable. I'm looking at time. It's funny because like speaking of time, and I'm sorry to reimpose linear time on us, but I wonder, we have a couple of minutes. I wonder if I want to open and just see if there's any other questions that any folks would like to ask of Sylvie before I maybe pass it back and give Sylvie the last word and our thanks. Well, I'll just I'll take this brief opportunity to remind us that we will not have a speaker next week because it is midterm week, but the week following, everybody is invited back to join us for Daniela Lieja Quintanar's talk, which will be at this time and place. Thank you all so much for logging on today. And Sylvie, please have the last word this evening, and our eternal gratitude for visiting us this evening.
Well, thanks everybody. And thank you to Amy and to Adam for having me. And thank you all for having such good questions. And yeah, this has really been great. And I always learn so much about my own thinking, being prompted to think out loud with you all. I wish we could all be in a room together, but in the future, hopefully.
Yes, thank you so much. Good night, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your energy.
Sylvie.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, y'all.